بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Just now when I was on my way here, I asked Omaru which floor is SIT. It's been so long, subhanAllah. Hope everyone's doing well. And yeah, so today the topic is a little heavy, and usually it's been misunderstood, the very least, by many as well. So what happens is, we all know that the word dunya is practically reprimanded quite a lot in terms of how we should see it, but then how should we practically live by it is something that we would be covering a little bit. But then to begin with, by definition, by the very definition of dunya, actually it comes from a word dana. So like for example, the Arabic word dana comes with, in the form that people would lower themselves close to the ground. So by very definition of the word, linguistically speaking, it means low. So it is undeniably low, right? But then I remember one of the reasons why many people would see Islam as a hindrance from accepting it is not because they deny God. I remember when I was in university, like some of my non-Muslim friends, whenever we talk about religion, whenever we talk about God, they have no problem accepting it. They actually accept that there must be a creator, undeniably one. But then what bothers them is that when it comes to the rituals, when it comes to the sacrifice, that's when they don't want to really embrace it. Like for example, when we talk about prayers, like they don't want to be the ones who would wake up for Fajr, or someone who would be praying 5 times a day. When it comes to hijab, for example, it's a hindrance. So many of these hindrances actually ties closely to their attachment or their preference of this dunya over anything else. So that's why we would be discussing a lot about this preference and how Allah actually sees this world in itself. That is narrated by Sahih ibn where Rasulullah mentioned about the world, if it were to work more than not a mosquito, but a wing of it, wing of a mosquito, then the disbeliever would not be even given a zip. That is how Allah sees this world. And that is how we should see this world. Right? So subhanAllah, not only are the disbeliever given a zip of water, they're given far more than that as well. And further on, Jabir ibn Abdullah rahimahullah narrated that Rasulullah mentioned about when they were actually passing through a marketplace. And Rasulullah is someone who would be teaching companions whenever he sees an occasion to. And so when Rasulullah was passing by the marketplace, and everyone was looking at him, right? And Rasulullah passed by a carcass, basically a dead animal, basically who is a 1-ear goat. So one of his ear is gone, and it's a dead animal on the street. And he reached out and take out one of his ears and asked, "Who amongst you would buy this for a coin? Who amongst you would buy this for a dinar?" Right? And the companions were very perplexed and confused. Like, even if you were to sell it to me or to have me keep it, I would do so. And what Rasulullah continued asking for 3 consecutive times, "Who amongst you would like to buy this goat from me?" But none of them would. And they actually replied that what would be the worth of it? Because it's dead and it's even flawed as an object. Right? And Rasulullah replied that by Allah, swearing by Allah first and foremost, that this worldly life is less important or is even less significant than this is to you. Yeah? So subhanAllah, this is again how Allah wants us to see this world. And you might be asking then, why would then we live in a world where the disbelievers are given so much? right? And at the same time, how would we reconcile the fact that they are not believing in Allah, but yet they're giving so much, right? And then this ayah actually answers this question beautifully, right? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولولا إن يكون الناس أمة واحدة لجعل بما يكفر بالرحمن لبيوتهم سقفا من فضة ومعارج عليها يظهرون. Were it not be for the people to be one united nation, not united on Islam, not united on following the Sunnah, following Allah, but united on disbelief, Allah would have given them staircase with silver roof. Right? What does that mean? That means the only reason why the disbeliever are not given the entire world is because everyone would have fallen into it. Because everyone would have fallen into it. What does that mean? Because when you think about it, when we see the non-Muslims or the disbelievers have more wealth or have status or have their situation far better than Muslims, sometimes we can't help but think to ourselves, why would Allah be giving them so much? But in fact, many of which of these are a test to them and a test to us. A test to us as to how we would see these gifts or this, I wouldn't necessarily call it gifts because it could be a test. Or how do we see these provisions that are given to them at least, right? And Allah wants us to see this through the lens that these are basically soul workings. That the only reason why they're not given everything is because they would have us converted to this belief, right? And so that's why in Arabic there is this saying which says something really profound, is that wood that is long lasting is better than a gold that's temporary. And so subhanAllah, one of the greatest wisdom why we are not given much of this world is because Allah has prepared for us a better world and an even longer lasting world for us for the hereafter. Right? And following that, like not only does it not work too much, or Allah wants us to see it of not much work, but Allah also tells us very beautifully how this dunya, we would ourselves see it of less world, or see it of less work eventually. Like in Surah Al-Hadid, part of the ayah, the red part of the ayah, كَمَثَلِ كَيْفِ أَجَلِ كَفَارَ نَبَاتُهُ ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا ثُمَّ يَكُونُ حُنَفًا. What this ayah, part of the ayah says that, for example, first part of the ayah speaks of how this world is basically completely enjoyment, right? And following it, it speaks of how people are pursuing some of the provisions of this world. But following it, it speaks of how we would eventually see that whatever we are pursuing will change. Not do we see them as, for example, as green as it would be. Right? Now let's just kind of reflect upon this. Like how many times we are pursuing gold, and after we pursue it, we end up finding it with time growing or turning yellow. Right? That new iPhone of yours doesn't seem that brand new anymore. Right? That new what else? What example? What for example, what that new not books. People don't read books. Books don't work. What new car or new apartments that were once very green to you turned yellow. Like so, this is the dunya where no matter how hard you pursue it, like eventually, even once you're given it, even if you have hold of it, you will eventually see it turn yellow. Not that it turned yellow, but you see it turn yellow. This is the subtle difference that Allah wants us to notify as well. Right? So this is again comes to show that no matter the dunya in itself isn't worth that while, and at the same time we would eventually see it as not worth our one's worth. The following it, not only is dunya should be seen as less, but it is actually very treacherous. What does that mean? We all must have heard of a narration, very famous narration, where when Allah created heavens and hell, Allah has surrounded hell with temptations. And many of these temptations are basically the attachment of this life. So much so that, for example, Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah mentioned about a dunya, it's like a booby trap. What's a booby trap? It's like a trap that is to lure you in and only to find yourself in a worse situation. Right? And so there's a story, a very famous story that's collected in the Israeliyat. So it's not really actually a narration from Rasulullah, but it's often quoted by scholars of Islam. So it's actually a story of Isa alayhi salam with the man who met him. So there's this man from Banu Israel who approached Isa alayhi salam requesting to accompany him, right? And on their travel, Isa alayhi salam had noticed that their lunch that consisted of 3 loaves of bread are left with 2. So he asked that companion of his that who took that bread, right? And by then that companion swore by Allah that he did. And Isa came further and farther. And they were on a journey, and then they came across a blind man. They came across the blind man. And Isa Islam, whom by his God-given ability, cured that blind man. Cured that blind man, right? And upon which the companion who was beside him saw that miracle, was completely amazed. And Isa Islam took that example, wanted to ask him again. He asked by Allah, who had taken that third loaf of bread. And after seeing this miracle, he still denies it and still swear by Allah and said he didn't take it. Okay, and then they continue on the journey, and Isa came by a riverbed, and he saw that in order to cross the river, or in order to travel, they need to cross the river. And Isa told the companion to say Bismillah, and they crossed the river without getting wet. Okay? And upon seeing this, again, the companion was really amazed about the miracle that occurred before his eyes. Right? And Isa again asked by Allah, who has taken the third loaf of bread? And he still, again, swear by Allah that he did. And last but not least, once they crossed the river, Isa gathered a few piles of soil, and again, by Allah's permission, he converted those soil into 3 piles of gold. And Isa said, 1 pile is for me, and 1 pile is for you, and the 3rd pile is for the one who has taken the 3rd loaf of bread. And immediately, he admits that he is the one who has taken the 3rd loaf of bread. Right? And Isa gave all 3 piles to him. And while he was busy gathering those wealth, 3 horsemen passed by him. And without a second thought, they have taken his life and has acquired those wealth. And while those 3 men were again busy counting those wealth, they have ordered one of them to go and fetch some food for them. And that's when Shaitan came to 3 of them. And for the one who was preparing for the food, Shaitan came to him that says, why would you be busy preparing for food when you can possibly take all the wealth? How? If you put poison into their food and get the other 2 killed, then you would have acquired those 3 piles of gold. Right? And how Shaitan came to the other 2 is that they were 2 and he was 1. So if they were to gang up against him, they have a higher likelihood of waiting. So how about that once that man comes back, they will gang up upon him and to just spread it across the two. And so what happened is the man prepared his food with poison, reached him, and the two men, enjoyably, not enjoyably, but unfortunately, have that third man killed. Right? And while they were enjoying the meal, it's just a matter of time before they are killed as well. And the narration doesn't stop there, interesting. The narration actually continues that with these 3 piles of gold and 4 dead bodies, Isa came back, weeping, seeing all these before his eyes. He said, this is what this dunya does to people. Right? And we can all hear a lot of examples how there are numerous stories how people are busy counting their wealth and acquiring this dunya and have lose focus on what is better. And there are numerous examples of this, right? In current world, and especially in a lot of so-called Muslim-dominant countries, where wealth is part of their identity, has to that extent reached the point where the country itself is identified as wealth. That is how unfortunate our situation has been. Right? And so this comes to show that this dunya is basically, not only is it lowly, and it has all the attraction, it has all the attraction to lure you in. And now, so with all these covered, now how should we then practically see dunya? So there's actually a really powerful cure that I'd like to cover, that it's an advice. It's actually an advice by Rasulullah to the companion. So, and Sa'id ibn Sa'id narrated that a man came to Rasulullah and asked of him an advice. And this is actually very common amongst the collection of Ahadith, where there are companions who would personally approach Rasulullah to ask for advice. And there are many of these narrations that were tailored for the companions. But at the same time, many of these narrations we can all take heed from. And this specific companion asked of, what is that one deed that would make people and Allah love? And that's when Rasulullah mentioned about have zuhd for this world, for the worldly life, and Allah will love you. And if you have zuhd for what people possess, and people will love you. Right? And it's funny where linguistically zuhd is a word that defines abandonment, that defines as disinteresting yourself, that defines as or detaching yourself from this world, right? But then to Islam, it is defined as to abandon all which doesn't benefit you of your life, right? But then to further elaborate on it, because again, this is a part where many people have a lot of misconceptions as to what extent should we abandon this world, because we are told, like for example, even when we make dua, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. We would also seek of this goodness of this world, right? And so what is the goodness of this world? How much should we see of this world? Right? And so this is where Imam Ahmad rahimahullah has beautifully defined zuhd in 3 different levels. So the first level, Imam Ahmad defined that firstly is to shun that all that is forbidden. And that is a general Muslim. That is a general bare minimum of a Muslim. What does that mean? That means to forsake everything that's haram. Right? That's the basic bare minimum. Right? And second of all is to avoid what is lawful, what is halal, even though it's permissible, but it's not necessary. And this is the next level. This is the zuhd of the next level of the elite. Imam Ahmad called them elite. Now this is where you want to cut off from whatever that is or you try to, I should say, you try to cut off those that would actually be an excess to your well-being, for example. Like, for example, let me give you a scenario where, for example, if a rich man who owns tens of billions, or let us say millions, right, and he's paid his zakat, and he's very consistent with his sadaqah, right, let's just say. And will it be haram for him to buy a Lamborghini? That is, say, for example, $1 million or two. No, I don't think it's $1 million.
9 or 10.
Sorry?
9 or 10.
Million?
Yeah.
Really? So, okay, so maybe this is a billionaire who's thinking about buying a 9 million Lamborghini. Okay? So, but is it haram for him to buy a Lamborghini? No, he has the wealth, he has the money. At the same time, he's fulfilling his obligations with those money. Right? But then, will that Lamborghini possibly distract him? Will that center of attention that he would be in ever change him as a person? We never know. Right? So even though it's not haram, but is it truly necessary? Not quite. Right? And at the same time, this is where we should judge as individuals. What is that thing that we want to cut out because in order to be on the safer side of things? And that's what Imam Ahmad wants us to achieve. Right? So even though there isn't really a clear-cut answer that it's completely impermissible or it's completely wise to cut off certain things in your life, but there is something that we should gauge as individuals, that to reflect upon, that in order to be the safer side of things, because ultimately this is actually affecting our life. This is actually affecting our life. Right? And so, for example, like eating to your food. Like, is it haram to be eating to your food? Technically it is. But then it even went on to affect you from praying your sunnah, for example. Then how much should you be eating? How much should you be gauging yourself eating? Right? And for example, nowadays we have this cricket match. What was the final? What was the final with UK and Pakistan?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
Last Sunday.
Yeah, and it stormed many Muslim pages, the result. And yeah, it's polar opposite. And what if you were in the middle of a match and you decide to speed up Salah just to catch that moment, right? Is cricket in and of itself haram? No. Actually, it's one of the most, I don't know, I wouldn't say most permissible sport out there, but at least I know a lot of Muslims and a lot of Shiites would be engaged in it as well. But is it haram? No. But if it affects you as an individual, now that's when you want to think twice. Yeah? And so that's actually a beautiful part where, for example, some of the practice of Rasulullah that many aren't aware of. Like, for example, Rasulullah, he himself would actually discomfort his bed just so he can wake up with Hajj. What does Rasulullah's bed looks like? So, according to authentic narration, his bed is basically made up of leather that has branches of date palm trees on it. And Hafsa, upon seeing this, were very disheartened. And on one occasion, she decides to just not make an entire bed for him, but to just fold it in twice. Fold it in twice. And Rasulullah, because of that, wasn't able to wake up on time. And he was very upset about it. And just folding it in twice doesn't make it any more comfortable. Right? But yet, why did Rasulullah do so? It's because sometimes it does take a little bit of discomfort for us to worship God, whether we like it or not. And sometimes we need to somehow introduce this discomfort however we can in order to actually practice God. Because ultimately, if we get too comfortable with this world, it is easy to fall back or it's easy to slack back. Right? And so that's why these are practices where Rasulullah himself, when he is the leader of our ummah, who has attained iman that none of us can ever attain, would do so to preserve his iman. And how much more so should we do so as well? Right? And there's something beautiful as well, that when Rasulullah asked for provisions for him and his family, he would ask, for example, narrated and collected in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, where Abu Hurairah narrated that Rasulullah would ask for provisions for the family that is sufficiently nourishing. So in Arabic word, it is called kuta. What does that mean? That it's the risk, or it's the provision that's completely enough for today, but not enough to leave for tomorrow. Why would Rasulullah ask for just enough for us? It's because sometimes it's the excess that's distracting us. Yes. But should we as Muslims ascribe or aim to be poor then? Now this is where I need to rectify. Like, even though we have speak negatively about this world, but it ultimately boils back down to how we make use of this world. Because ultimately, subhanAllah, the ultimate wisdom that Allah wants us to do is through this lowly world to attain what is highly of the hereafter. So I want you to start seeing this world as a tool, as anything except but a tool to attain the hereafter. Right? Because imagine if our ultimate salvation comes from only doing good in this world, then this is how we should see it. We should keep it in our hands, nothing more than a tool that will help us attain a better hereafter. So that's why, for example, there's this one famous narration where Amr ibn As reported that one occasion he was ordered to put on his armor and his weapons and to prepare for war. And so he did so, and he reached Rasulullah, and Rasulullah was making move. And he raised his eyes to him and lowered them afterwards. And Rasulullah then speak, then Amr, I intend to send you to be the head of the army, and Allah will reward you with the spoils. Basically the spoil of wars. Basically reward whatever that is from that war. And Amr ibn As, upon hearing this, he said, beautifully, I do not embrace Islam in hopes for earning those spoil of wars, but rather I submitted in hopes of Islam and to be with Rasulullah. Right? Very perfect intention. Couldn't be ever more perfect. How did Rasulullah tell him or educate him about wealth in general? Oh, Amr, lawful wealth is excellent for a righteous man. What does that mean? That means Rasulullah is actually teaching the commandment, and in turn us as well, that if we can actually treat wealth as a tool or as something that's good, that we can do good with, then we can make the most out of the wealth that we are asking for or we are working towards. Right? And that's how Rasulullah wants to call us for. And that's why, for example, when it comes to the whole of August, like one of the daily adhkar we'll be making every morning and evening is we will ask Allah to protect us from disbelief and poverty. Rasulullah tied these two together because oftentimes when we are in a state of poverty, it is hard to see through anything else. Because imagine if you can't even have enough food for the day, how would you think of worship? How would you even think of anything more than the food that's bothering you? Right? So that's why we are often asked to seek protection for disbelief and poverty. That's oftentimes seen tied hand in hand. Right? And so that's why, for example, Rasulullah is teaching us that if we can see wealth not more than a tool, then we will be able to make use of it. And that's why, for example, then comes the next question then. If that's the case, then have any one of you heard of the narration where Rasulullah mentioned about where the rich will enter 500 years. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, 500 years later than the poor. How should we reconcile this hadith? How should we reconcile this narration where should we then as Muslims aspire to be poor since we will be entering paradise 500 early? Right? So scholars actually explain that this narration comes with understanding that they are asked to enter 500 years later is because they will be questioned of how they spend their life. Let me give you a polar, a more extreme example. Imagine if somebody who is living under the poverty line, who doesn't have food for the next day, and the only thing he would be doing is fishing. He would go fish, and the fish that he caught that day, he will use it to serve his family. And he's been living like this for his entire life. He doesn't have an extra closet for clothes, doesn't have an extra material that he would fulfill. Then how much of his provision will he ever be asked for? Of how he spent his life when he has nothing to give, right? And so in polar opposite, if somebody who has, for example, multiple closets, a closet for Dunya, a closet for different occasions, then how much more will he or she be questioned of how he or she spent his wealth? Right? And so that's why rich people will enter paradise 500 later. It's not necessarily mean they are in a worse situation, but just because they have a lot more to be questioned. And so that's the second level, right? And so the third level, Imam Ahmad mentioned about it is to guard one against anything that distracts one from Allah. But this is the highest level of sin. And for example, the very famous narration of Handala, where in one occasion in the marketplace, Handala was calling out himself as a hypocrite. Right? And Abu Bakr, upon hearing that, both went to Rasulullah to inquire more about it. And Handala mentioned about how when he was with Rasulullah, he could see paradise and hell right before his eyes. But then once he comes back to attend to his family, to attend to work, right, he doesn't feel that urge or that surge of iman. Right? And so they both went to Rasulullah. And Rasulullah mentioned about if his iman were to remain that high, to that level, wherever they are, even with Rasulullah or without with Rasulullah, the angels would have greeted them so. And it's very powerful because that actually essentially means that they have attained the status of the angels. That their iman are so consistent, their belief are so consistent that they have attained the status of an angel, that they can see them, they can interact with them. Right? And so that's why that comes to show that we as human beings, iman are meant to fluctuate. Iman are meant to fluctuate. But what you do with it, how you preserve it, is what matters. And so subhanAllah, I was doing this class with Abu Isa, and Abu Isa had a class on going through the tafsir of Surah Al-Imran. And we know the first few verses of Surah Al-Imran where Zakaria was blessed with a child, right? And when he was given all those signs, Zakaria actually asked for more proof. And upon explaining this verse, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, mentioned beautifully and powerfully that even Zakaria, as a prophet, who seen through all those signs, who was always in a consistent state of dhikr, he still asked for more signs. Upon that, Shaykh Uthaymeen mentioned about it is obligatory for any Muslims, for every Muslim, I should say, to seek for signs to increase his life. To seek for signs that will increase him. To ride on any opportunity that's before their eyes, to seek to increase their iman. Right? And so that's where we want to find every single opportunity to increase our iman, and also find every single opportunities to avoid things that would consume, that would affect our iman. And this is very beautiful. Like Imam Ahmad himself was the one who shared these true levels of Sunnah. And out of the four Imams, Imam Ahmad was known to be a scholar of Sunnah. Right? And his companion, Abu Bakr al-Zawad, companion of Imam Ahmad, shared a really powerful story with Imam Ahmad. So Imam Ahmad bought a used pair of shoes 18 years ago. So it was used already. And after that 18 years, there were 6 holes in his shoes. Right? And Imam Ahmad brought the shoes to Abu Bakr al-Zawad to ask him to bring it to be returned. Right? And Abu Bakr al-Zawad brought it to the store, and the man was mad. Right? The man was mad because Imam Ahmad, on the status of his caliber, should more or should deserve a new pair of shoes. Like, so that man gave him a new pair of shoes. And so that man brought to Imam Ahmad, and the next day, Imam Ahmad asked this friend of his to bring back the shoes. Why? He explains that these shoes kept him up all night thinking about it. Right? And at the same time, it comes back to how intricate and at the same time how aware they are of what would affect their life. And for us, it might not be a pair of shoes. It could be a new phone. It could be a new environment. It could be a new work that's distracting us. So we should be aware or constantly reflecting upon what is actually affecting us. And so before I close, there's this one last narration that I will be sharing to correct again to Yunus ibn Maysara, rahimahullah, mentioned about having zuhd in this dunya is not really about making haram what Allah made halal, right? Nor is it about throwing away your money. There's this very famous story where Kamal Malaki would share in his talks, where in one occasion he was approached by a brother who said he broke his laptop. He said because the laptop is distracting him from his worship. And upon hearing this, Kamal Malaki, funny share, he mentioned about next time, if there is anything that distracts you from Allah, bring them to me. Bring them to me. I'll take care of them, right? And so this comes to show that we're not meant to be throwing away or meant to be giving up everything that is halal for us, right? And further on, Yunus ibn Maysara further on mentioned about to be more confident of what Allah has than what you have. What does that mean? We should be awful convicted that what Allah has prepared for us is always better than what we have. What does that mean? Hereafter. That is ever more better, and that is ever more long-lasting. And further on, for us to be in a state that upon which calamity were to affect us, or calamity were to befall us, we were to behave the same. And so one of the many similarities between Rasulullah and Yusuf alayhi salam is that they have both went through the up and highs of life. Like Surah Yusuf is actually a surah that's revealed to Rasulullah in his lowest situation, in his most difficult part of his life. This comes to show that these prophets have up and down in their life. But have these up and down ever changed them to a least speak? No. They remain the same prophet. They remain same as convicted and as truthful to their words, truthful to their practice as they would be without these commandments. So even though as hard as these states are attainable to us believers, but we should always make it a point to aim for it. Because whether or not do we attain those states doesn't really matter. But it's more about us aiming towards it. And it doesn't stop there. For one that praise you or criticize you, you are able to see them the same. So no matter what circumstances, good or bad, or how you are treated by the people around you, you are still the same. And that is the truth that we should be aspiring towards. last but not the least, I will quote an ayah. لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون وما تنفقوا من شيء فإن الله به عليم. So this ayah speaks of that we will never attain bir until we are able to give up what we love most. And whatever you give is certainly well known to you. What does that mean? So if we have, or if we try or aim to reach that state of bir, we will actually be able to give, or I should say, because we are able to give what we love, that's where we can attain bir. And what is bir? So why is this related? Is because one of the greatest testimony of our love against this dunya is how less we give. And so therefore how much we give is the greatest testimony of how much we desire this world. Right? So that's why, for example, when we say Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, why is he called as-Siddiq? Is because of one famous narration where one of the mushrik from Quraysh came to Abu Bakr and said, your prophet of al-Isra al-Mi'raj have said that he's done all these things, right? And Abu Bakr, upon hearing that, mentioned about if this is really from Rasulullah, then it is without a shred of doubt from him. That it is without a shred of a doubt truthful. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is called the truthful because he were affirming of truth. But as-Siddiq is actually a lot more than that. Like when we read an ayah, for example, when Allah mentioned the status of the Salihin, Shuhada, Siddiqeen, right? All these high, lofty status, one of them is a Siddiq, right? So not only are they affirming of truth, they are themselves truthful. And so that's why, for example, when we talk about sadaqah, again, came from the same root word as Siddiq, because what you can say or what you can say is all good, but what you actually give is what really determines how truthful you are to your words. If you're able to not only give wealth, but to give, to be generous of your time, to be generous of spirit, as they say, is also part of giving. And if you can give all those that you love, that you cherish, that you value a lot, then you will attain bir. Okay, so bir is a word that's often translated as for example, righteousness. But again, this is far from what it actually entails. So, for example, when we say in Arabic language that large open space, we call them barra, like an open land. That is so large, so spacious, that you can't really see its end. That is barra. And bir actually comes from the same root word. What does that mean? That means you have reached a state that you're so generous, so big of heart, that whatever you give doesn't really affect you. Because like, if you have a large piece of land, then whatever happened in one of the corner won't really bother you. Right? Whatever happened in part of its space won't really bother, because you have so large of a land to give that it doesn't really bother you. So bir, attaining bir is about being that state of so big-hearted, and even in the English word, in English language, there's this concept of being so big-hearted that whatever happened doesn't really affect you. Right? So this is the concept here, where whatever you give, whatever happened to you, doesn't really change you or doesn't really affect you. Because you have so much to give, you have so much to offer. Yeah, so that's where, if we can attain through giving bir, and that's actually one of the highest status of sunnah. Because then whatever we give, we can basically see this world like a more than a tool to attain the hereafter. So with that I will any questions? But
you heard a narration by the Prophet ﷺ with where he said to Amr ibn Las
Yeah.
that there's no better gift for righteous man
Mm.
than
That good
than
wealth.
than wealth.
Mm.
So does that imply that one should not strive for worldly gains until he has achieved a certain level of righteousness?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. That's a really good question. Let me see. That's a good question. See it this way. I think we can really address in two aspects. Like first, how much you know of yourself. How much you know of yourself matters a lot, because that practically determines how you would be able to handle that very pursuit of yours. Like if you were to begin, are you able to remain the same person as you are before you have it? Right? And another aspect, like this deed of ours, actually, I wouldn't say call for struggle, but then the struggle that we go through is proportional to the reward that we get. Like for example, the very famous narration that the people who would recite the Quran beautifully is as though have attained the status of the angels. And the ones who struggle would earn the twice the reward. And so there's this powerful perspective in Islam that the more struggle that you've gone through, the more proportionally your reward will be, and the more Allah sees your effort, right? And so there's this famous there's this answer that Abu Isa that gave in one of his class. Really beautifully, he was sharing with us that when he goes to Umrah with the students, and there will be a group of students who would be crying profusely upon seeing the Kaaba. And there will be some that he would see are struggling to shed a tear. And when he sees those students, he won't give it as a general answer to everyone, right? But when he sees those people who are struggling to shed a tear, he'll actually approach them privately and tell them that it's okay to not be able to shed a tear. And why would he do so is because sometimes we would beat ourselves up for not being able to achieve something, or for not being able to feel a certain way. And so this comes to show that how we should be again focusing on the effort that we've put in into attaining those stuff or those status, instead of really being in that state as much. So I'd say it comes with a little correction on our perspective on eventually acquiring those things. Like, because ultimately whether we will be able to acquire those things is practically written. Right? And at the same time, we know of the narration where those who seek out this world will be able to see poverty before their eyes. And also they won't be granted whatever, or they will only be granted whatever is written for them as well. So that's why whether or not will we be able to get to that state, and even if we do, it's more about the effort that we need to put in, and at the same time keep rectifying our intention towards it as well. So I guess it's more of a focus on process than the result. If that makes sense.
I have a question. Thank you so much for your sharing. I noticed that sometimes people do glamorize struggle in a sense in their religion. So, of course, there is a certain type of deep good things you receive when you go through a struggle, but then sometimes people do focus too much on the struggle that they forget about this dunya as well. I'm not sure how to approach this question because feels like people do like they prioritize their next life, but then also I feel like there's something in this life as well that we should be doing, that we should be being grateful for. But then sometimes you just question, am I going through enough struggles, or do this dunya, like, am I being too much in this dunya? Then, for instance, if I compare myself with other people, and then you say, oh, maybe they have more struggles than me. Am I not being like close enough to God and all that stuff? So it's a kind of a question between how do you make sure that you're not in too much dunya, but also you can, like, do you think you can enjoy this life as well in this situation? Sorry.
Sorry. Let me see. Because so you mean sorry, I don't really get
Yeah,
it.
it's okay. Actually, my question is very, I think it's very broad, but then how do you, probably I'll put it this way, does the person has to struggle in this world? And can you, because of course the next life is better than this one, but then I'm pretty sure there's something in this world that we should be always like appreciating, and also not be focusing like or demonizing this world as well. What do you think?
Completely. And so I think the most important distinction is that if you manage, or if you can manage ultimately recognizing that this world is not comparable to the next, and at the same time you recognize that these enjoyments that you're going through will be able to facilitate you to worship better, to make you a better Muslim, and those are, I think, one of the best form of worship. So like one of the narration where Rasul has told us that if we are regular with our prayers and all of a sudden we have missed a night or two, of prayer, and Rasul told us that that sleep of ours will be just as rewarding as if we have stood in prayer. And at the same time, if we can actually rectify our attention, that whatever sleep, whatever food, whatever things that we do of mundane, unrewardable tasks, if we can rectify those intentions, that it will make me worship better, then those can actually be a stepping stone for you to good deed, or a stepping stone for you to work for the hereafter. Like for example, some people love travel, and to be honest, I don't really like traveling until recently, when after the lockdown, and I never knew, it's never been part of my life, right? But then I know of people who would actually see all these trips that they're making as an iman boosting trip, whether it's going to Muslim countries or non-Muslim countries. Because to be able to see the ayah of Allah across different nations, across different culture, is an iman boosting thing to a human being. Right? And that can be a worship. And that's a beautiful part of our deen. Even though we are asked to struggle, but at the same time we are asked to take that very balance, that if it can improve our worship, that even the most mundane task or mundane enjoyment can also be just as rewarding. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that does.
Brother, in our case, usually, especially in my case, because working at the same time, it's like we are struggling in the time, working with our employers, and fulfilling our obligatory, like in prayers, or even if you have some time, then you will do the nafil prayers, right? But sometimes because of the time and you are working, so sometimes your first prayer will be, if you wanted to do it on time, sometimes, just like for me, I wanted to do it on the, the I mean the baraka or the blessings of the prayers on the first hour of the prayer time, right? But sometimes for me, I'm doubting myself as well. Sometimes I don't know, but because I usually like on the second hour, it's like, oh my God, it's already in the second hour, and then sometimes maybe, but sometimes Shaitan is like pulling me out, and then I'm supposed to put my prayers on the third part. For me, I'm questioning myself, like, it's like I'm one of the munafiks, or like something like that, or am I um do how do I call it? I like I'm on the part of the dunya now? It's something like that. Sorry.
You mean for prayer time, the it's like you don't manage to, for example, wake up in the last prayer part.
No, it's like doing your Fard prayer on the proper time, but as Muslims, we wanted to do it on the first part, right?
Mm.
First part, I mean first hour of the prayer time, yeah. I have the prayer time. But because of us, we are working, and then most of the workers, especially on Maghrib time for me, because on Maghrib time now is like it's our cooking time, preparing the meals of our employers. So it's like I'm struggling to put it on the first or on the second part of the hour itself. So I sometimes I was doing it on the last part of the hour. So it's like, for myself, it's like, am I part of the munafik? Or sometimes I don't like to do that way, but it's like because of the duties.
Actually, the fact that you are questioning yourself about it
Yeah, sometimes.
is the greatest sign of iman. This is actually the greatest sign of iman, where not fulfilling an ibadah, or not fulfilling the ibadah as well as you want it to, and because of that, seeing yourself a munafiq is in and of itself part of, is in and of itself a greatest sign of faith. Like, there's this famous saying, I forgot from which scholar, that says the good deed the good deed of a sinner is a sin to the righteous. Let me clarify this slowly. Like, the good deed of a sinner is a sin to the righteous. What does that mean? That means some of the good deeds that the sinner think that they are fulfilling or doing becomes the bare minimum, or becomes the lowest standard to the righteous. Because the righteous have so high of an ambition that even those good deeds that the sinner are doing are seen as sin to them. Because for them to have such a high aspiration that they are expecting a lot more from themselves, so to speak. Right? This is not to be taken literally though. Like, this is more like a comparative sense. And so I'd say that you felt like you are not doing enough because of that is in and of itself the greatest sign of faith. And this is first thing. And second of all, like you mentioned about prayer time. So this is the thing that there is actually a valid difference of opinion in the among the ulama as to whether the starting time of prayer is the best. There is actually a difference of opinion, and that comes to show that it's not unanimously accepted that it's definitely must to pray within a certain time. And there's a reason why Allah and Rasulullah has defined prayer times in range, but not in exact. So I'd say if it's still within the range, and especially for Maghrib, there's actually a very there are multiple versions that I've heard of for Maghrib time, right? And at the same time, this touch a little bit upon the fiqh of prayer time. Like I'm clearly not qualified to speak about it, but then sometimes we've heard that Maghrib needs to be prayed in the first half, and that's completely false.
Yeah, and also I'm thinking that it's like I'm questioning myself that am I choosing the dunya over my akhirah, something like that.
I'd say if you can actually hold on to praying it still within the time frame, for example, that's found on your app, and even though it might be near the later part,
Yeah.
then I'd say you are still preserving your deen. So I'd say it's still more like we try our best, and especially that if circumstances take over, we still try to make out a way to still fulfill it within the permissible realm. That is good enough. That is good enough. Yeah, even though it may come without the sunnah prayers and without those additional things that you would add on normally, then I'd say you're still preserving it. But that's why, for example, when I narrate about the Handala narration, like Rasulullah not only spoke about that the angels would greet him, and he actually followed it with an advice. He followed it with an hour for an hour. What does that mean? So that means, like, it's normal for us to be carried away with tasks. And it's perfectly normal. But as long as we can keep our lowest minimal faith above the permissible, then we are still in good hands. And we are still safe.
But I don't know if I heard it right. It's like one lectures of, I think, Omaru Sulaiman. He said like as long as even if you pray on the last hour, especially on the very last hour or minutes, it's like the consciousness that it's like the consciousness it counts. It's like you have, I have to pray because the time is almost running out. So it's like something like that. I don't know if it's
So in terms of the catching the prayer time, some scholars even went on to mention about even if, like, for example, you started your takbir right before the prayer time ends, your prayer is still accepted. So even though you might be praying right past the the permissible range, the prayer time, your prayer is still counted because you've started your takbir before that. So that's like the leniency that the ulama has given.
Yeah, but that's not applicable for two salah, Fajr and Asr.
Yes.
Because for Asr you have to finish your salah just before sunset. You need to finish it before sunset.
No, that's
Before Maghrib.
That's actually a bit of a difference of opinion as well.
Right.
Yeah. So what happens is some would actually mention about, for example, there are narrations where companions would make up their Fajr Sunnah right after they prayed their Fajr. Right? And sometimes some scholars even went on mentioning about it's not recommended, of course, but then it's still permissible if you were to miss your Sunnah, then it's still permissible for you to pray it after Asr, for example. If you want to make up for your Sunnah of Zuhr. Right? Some would even go on to that extent, right? Even though it's not recommended or not permissible to pray at the time. So again, and the beautiful part of these difference of opinions is that it comes to show that isn't really a clear cut. And this difference of opinions is in and of itself a mercy. Yeah, but at the same time, it's not for us, of course, to abuse it. But at the same time, this difference of opinions is just to, of course, for us to avoid as much as possible. At the same time, it comes to show that there is some leniency in these regards, where it's not a clear-cut definition. If there is no question, then we can call for سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.